Let's get into that Phala Phala issue, which I was starting to discuss, where the Constitutional Court has reserved judgment in the EFF and ATMs on a challenge on Phala Phala. The Constitutional Court heard arguments in the National Assembly's decision not to adopt the independent panel's report on the Phala Phala scandal. Now, back in 2022, the National Legislature voted not to adopt the independent panel report led by retired Chief Justice Sandile Ngcobo that found that there is a prima facie case for which President Ramaphosa must answer for the events that took place on his Phala Phala farm. Now, to unpack what actually transpired yesterday, we're joined by a legal analyst and managing director at Donda Attorneys, Melusi Xulu. Melusi, always a pleasure having you. Thanks for joining us again.
Good morning, Leanne, and good morning to the viewer at home. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for helping us understand this, because we saw yesterday that the EFF is basically arguing that unless the Constitutional Court meaningfully and permanently intervenes to curtail partisan interests in favor of legality, history will repeat itself. I think that was the big message that came out. Is the relief that the EFF is seeking would not breach the principle of separation of powers?
I think Advocate Primit answered that very clearly when he was engaging with Justice Theron, because Justice Theron said, you know, in the case, I think it's the UDM case versus the Speaker of the National Assembly, she said the minority judgment, when it was introduced, it said the Constitutional Court must be careful of judicial overreach, so to speak. But Advocate Primit then said he agrees with that, but the problem is there's already a precedent that, you know, when there are such issues, the Constitutional Court can state what you know should be done so that the Constitution, the Constitution can be you know protected. So in the UDM case, that's what happened. The Speaker was told she has powers, and she was told by the Constitution. So the essence of this is, if there is a violation of the Constitution, what is the duty of the Constitutional Court? Yeah. In my view, they should intervene, bearing in mind that there are separation of powers, of course, but that is also based on precedent.
Yeah. So, I mean, given the Constitutional Court's role in interpreting the Constitution, I think we're gathering from your response, but I need to ask you, do you believe it has the constitutional authority to substitute the National Assembly's impeachment decision as requested by the EFF? I mean, what is your understanding in an issue like this?
Okay. Again, Advocate Primit, when he was engaging with, I believe it's Justice Majid, I'll be forgiven for not pronouncing it correctly, but the justice asked him, now what should happen? Should we delete the votes? Should we cancel? And he said, that's exactly what should be done, because whenever the Constitution is confronted with an unlawful act, or to a certain extent, they have the powers to do so. They are empowered by the Constitution. Now, let us remember what Section 2 of the Constitution says. It says that the Constitution is the supreme court of the law. Any act or any conduct that contradicts the Constitution should not stand. And I believe that is what the EFF and the ATM are advancing, that, look, yes, the Section 89, subsection 1 says they can be able to vote, and a two-thirds majority must be done. But also, we have to look at the party line versus the Constitution. Yeah. Now, what matters more? That's what actually should be answered.
Yeah, and this is, it's almost history repeating itself in terms of what we saw happening with Nkandla, and now again with Phala Phala, and the same kind of theme was brought about, you know, the party versus the state and the Constitution. If we have to draw similarities between these two different cases that have been brought, both now before the Constitutional Court, was a precedent set in the Nkandla issue that could perhaps be forced into this one?
Yes, I'll be forgiven for repeating or referencing to the same advocate again. Yeah. Advocate Primit, in his introduction, he said this is akin to the Nkandla, you know, situation where the party line was they have to vote and support the president. Obviously, they are the majority at the time. And this is the same situation where I mean, we saw reports that they were told to vote amongst the party lines or they'll be disciplined. So you can see that, when they were voting along the party lines. And so now, what is important is, should the president be held accountable based on the allegations that he violated the constitutional provisions or the laws? And that is a question that is important for the nation. Once the party is above the nation, it becomes a problem. But I'm just saying that generally, not specifically to this case.
Yeah. So the ANC, if we go back to this case, the ANC is basically contending that the EFF's application is founded on speculative claims rather than material irregularities. How do you assess the EFF's argument in the context? I mean, from what you heard yesterday, could the court set a dangerous precedent by interfering with the National Assembly's internal processes?
Leanne, I'll repeat again, it's not something that will be a precedent that is new when it was already done in the UDM case. The precedent is already there for a constitution where a constitutional provision has not been respected or followed. It can suggest that this is what should be done. So this is why Advocate Premin said, but it's already happened. It is this court that said it can intervene, and that's what happened. So the court can't now come and say, no, we can't intervene in this time. Then there'll be a question, and there's the school of thought that will say, are we having a Zuma law situation again, where when it comes to the president or the former president, certain laws apply differently? So I think everything must be done in a uniform way. And if it has been proven that the constitutional provision has not been followed, I'm of the view that that should be correct.
That should be the issue. Is there a distinction between prima facie evidence and sufficient evidence in impeachment cases? I mean, how do you interpret the panel's reliance on prima facie evidence versus the ANC's insistence on higher evidentiary threshold?
Yeah. If you go to paragraph 69 to paragraph 71 of the panel report, the Section 89 panel report, which was done by the former Chief Justice Sandile Ngcobo and two other senior legal experts, they do say, Leanne, we don't have a way of having oral evidence and so forth, but what we have with us is not to determine the guilt of the president, but to see if there is a case to answer. So what they were focusing on was that there's prima facie evidence. But if you listen to Advocate Katz, he does say, look, this really shouldn't be an argument, because if you go to, I believe he said, the Gwangwa case, which he might have been involved in, he said, essentially what was said in this case is that prima facie evidence is sufficient evidence that there should be a prosecution. It does not necessarily say there's a guilt or innocent. Who needs to establish that is the impeachment committee, but it's not the panel committee or the ones who did the panel report. So I know the differentiation was discussed as a long length, but it's a matter of using words and so forth. But what is important is that the test of the panel report should not have an understanding that they need to determine the guilt of the president. They just need to find, is there a case to stand on? Yeah. Was the duty of the president to report according to Section 34 of the PECA Act? Was the president working, having another job besides the work that he has? That is based on Section 96 of Section 1 that says a member of the cabinet and a deputy minister should not have other paid work. So those are the things that they were investigating at a preliminary stage. Now, to substitute that and make it as if they were supposed to do the work of the court of law, I don't think it's a correct argument.
So, I mean, the EFF says that the failure to adopt the independent panel's findings undermines the National Assembly's responsibilities to hold the president to account. Should Parliament's failure to act in this regard be considered a constitutional violation? Or, and I mean, this is a very important question, does the National Assembly have discretion in determining the threshold for impeachment?
It's a mixture of politics and the law. Unfortunately, when it comes to Section 89, as we stand, if you read it, it says the president may be removed if the 2/3 majority have voted that he should be removed. So at the end of the day, we may say we want them to implement the constitution, but the section has allowed them to have a 2/3 majority vote. So I'm not sure whether maybe the EFF may be suggesting that there should be an amendment to that part, because at the end of the day, the section is there. And if they use that and they want to vote for the president not to be removed, that's what the section says. So I don't know what the constitution will say if they decide that they do not follow the constitution. Maybe they'll ask that they look at what was done by the sixth administration, or they'll suggest that an impeachment is done immediately. So I believe that the challenge here, Leanne, is that in any case, Section 89 says there must be a vote.
Yeah.
And they will vote amongst the party lines. So maybe the constitution should decide whether an impeachment must be done if they believe that they do not follow the constitution.
Well, interesting. Thank you. Thanks for giving us a better understanding of what we saw unfolding yesterday and what a day it was. It certainly was a long one listening to it. And Melusi Xulu summing it all up for us. He's, of course, a legal analyst and managing director at Donda Attorneys. That's your legal analysis. And we now have to wait and see what's going to happen.